They wore crowns, but died in chains, some by fire, some by poison, others alone in blood-slicked silence. Behind jeweled thrones and golden robes lay bodies broken by fear, betrayal, and madness. History remembers their titles, but not the screams that echoed through torchlit chambers. This is not a tale of glory. It is a dirge of monarchs undone by their own power, swallowed by cruelty, and buried beneath velvet shrouds. In these 10 deaths, we glimpse the haunting truth. Royalty does not guarantee mercy, only spectacle. Before we dive into these forgotten stories of survival and sorrow, consider hitting that like button and subscribing. And tell me where you're watching from. I love knowing we're exploring the buried past together, across time and space. They built their lives in marble and silk, high above the people they ruled, draped in symbols of godhood. But when death came, it did not bow. It crawled in through the palace walls like rot beneath gold leaf, slow and merciless. History remembers. Kings and queens as myth, etched in stone, crowned in paintings, entombed in legend. But what it rarely shows is how they died, twitching in flames, weeping in corners, whispering for sons who never came. The throne, they believed, was sacred, but it was only a stage. And like all actors, they too had exits, some dignified, most not. In Persia, royal blood sizzled on white marble as kin turned blade against kin. In medieval France, a monarch believed he was made of glass, afraid to walk lest he shatter. In Byzantium, they blinded their emperors with red-hot irons, believing a sightless ruler could no longer command heaven's mandate. The air in these chambers was always heavy, not with perfume, but with fear, a kind of silence that bruises. Because every monarch knew, power makes you sovereign, but fear makes you prisoner. They dined alone, slept with guards outside their doors, trusted no one, not lovers, not siblings, not their own sons. Each one carried a crown on their head and a knife in their heart. This is not a story of pageantry. It is a story of unraveling. We will walk through 10 deaths, not famous wars or noble ends. No, the quiet assassinations, the grotesque tortures, the psychological implosions behind closed doors. These are deaths drenched in madness, in fire, in velvet-draped horror. Each one reveals the cost of rule, not in silver or blood spilled on battlefields, but in the slow erosion of the soul. And yet, they were human. That is the ache beneath it all. Behind the crowns were frightened children, vengeful siblings, fractured minds. The pomp masked grief, the gold masked rot. You will see them fall, but more than that, you will feel the falling, because in the end, every empire crumbles the same way, from within. And every royal corpse, no matter how divine it once seemed, turns to dust just like yours. She once walked through Versailles like a swan on water, white skin bathed in perfume, diamonds nestled in her powdered hair, the hem of her gown barely touching the marble. The world bent toward her smile. She was spectacle. She was France now. She is barefoot on splintered wood, wrists bound, head shaved like a criminal. The morning air stinks of rot, wet cobblestone, and sweat. Her carriage is not golden. It is open, exposed, and Paris watches. They call her names. Monster, whore, widow caped. Their screams tear through the narrow streets like flocks of birds startled from a graveyard. Children spit. Women who once sewed for her now throw stones. Men climb lampposts to catch a final glimpse of her humiliation. But she does not cry. There is something eerie in her stillness. Not defiance, not pride, just an absence. As if the woman they've dragged through this street is already gone. What's left is a husk in a gray shift dress, trembling with each rattle of the cart, but too numb to beg. She does not speak. She has learned what words cost months ago, They took her husband. The king died first, slowly, publicly, to the roar of applause. She heard the blade from her cell. Not the fall, but the aftershock of it. The sudden, ghastly cheer that made the pigeons scatter from the rooftops. Now it is her turn. She remembers her children. Their hands, once soft and warm in hers, taken. Her son, made into a puppet, a prisoner in his own skin. Her daughter, too quiet now, too pale. Marie no longer dreams of escape. She dreams only of silence. The cart stops ahead, the guillotine, slick with the memory of yesterday's execution. Its red-stained wood shines in the gray sun like a wound that never closes. Around it, the crowd pulses like a living creature, hungry, vengeful. She ascends the steps alone. Her hands shake slightly, but she does not fall. A guard reaches to guide her elbow. She flinches, not from fear, but because touch is no longer something she understands. She turns to face them one last time, not as a queen, not as a mother, but as a woman, hollowed out by history, reduced to myth. They scream. She breathes, a moment, that's all. Then the blade, it's quick. It always is. But the silence that follows, that strange, weightless quiet, feels eternal. As if the air itself mourns the ghost of a world just severed from its spine. She came as a symbol, she left as a lesson, and Paris did not weep. The palace smelled of lacquer and blood. Red columns soared into the smoky air like petrified flames, casting long shadows across the stone. Somewhere beyond the screen doors, a silk curtain swayed in rhythm with the breath of the emperor. Shallow, amused. He lounged in indigo robes, his lips stained with plum wine. Around him, gold, tigers, acrobats. But one man stood closer than the rest. Always Lu Jin, he walked like a whisper. No footsteps, no past. His face was moon-smooth, untouched by beard or lineage. A eunuch, yes, but more than that. A spider in velvet robes. At Zheng Di's side, he wielded more power than generals, more influence than ministers. The boy emperor called him treasure. Others called him plague. Lu Jin had no children, no legacy, only access. He opened doors none dared touch, vaults, chambers, mines. He knew where secrets were buried, which noble wept for which concubine, which general had betrayed which oath. He could destroy reputations with a whisper, but he forgot what all favorites forget. Emperors love like fire. They warm you, then burn you alive. It began in silence. A glance too cold. A message delayed. Guards stationed a little too close. The court, once drunk on his laughter, now waited for his fall with sharpened smiles. He had risen too far. And the gods, or perhaps men pretending to be gods, demand balance. They arrested him at dawn, no trial, no voice, just ropes, thick as wrists, wrapped around him like vines. They dragged him from the chamber, where once he had dined with princes, his silk robes torn, his feet bare on the frozen stone. The air smelled of old water and wet iron. They dismembered him slowly, not in a fit of rage, but as ceremony. A lesson. His body became a spectacle. Fingers first, then ears, then tongue, that serpentine thing that had spoken too freely. Still alive, they lowered what was left of him into the cauldron. The boiling hiss echoed across the square like thunder. Under glass dot, he did not scream. Not at first. The court watched from behind gauze screens, their expressions unreadable. The emperor remained unseen, but surely he listened. Listened to the man he once called brother turned broth. This was not justice. It was theater, and in the steam that rose from Lu Jin's bones, something shifted in the hearts of those who ruled. A fear, a reminder. Power is not a gift. It is a spotlight, blinding, hot, and temporary. When it moves on, It incinerates what it once adored. Liu Jin's name was erased from records, his body fed to ash and river. But his story lingered, not in books, but in the silence between palace walls. A warning: those who live too close to the throne often die in its shadow. There is a portrait, oil on canvas, heavy with shadow, where a father cradles his dying son, eyes wide with madness, fingers trembling, soaked in blood. The tsar presses his forehead against the wound he caused, as if trying to reverse time through grief alone. That painting is not myth. It is memory, and it began with a scream. The year was 1581. The winter air smelled of smoke and cold metal. Inside the stone halls of Alexandrova Sloboda, silence cracked like ice. Ivan paced in circles, his beard unkempt, his robe stained with dried wine and dust. Whispers had filled the court for years now. The Tsar is touched by devils. The Tsar sees ghosts, and perhaps he did. He had buried 3 wives, lost countless children, and slaughtered his most loyal advisors. His soul had been gnawed down to a feverish stump, but it was his son, Ivan Ivanovich, who remained his last tether to the world. The boy was brave, earnest, his father's shadow, but without the poison. And that made him dangerous. They argued that day about a wife, about war, about discipline. It doesn't matter. What matters is the sound. Ivan's voice rising, cracking. Then the blur of motion. A hand. No, a staff, made of iron and rage. Then bone. Then silence. The air collapsed. Blood flowered across the flagstones like a red blossom forced into bloom. His eyes blinked once, twice, then dimmed. And the Tsar fell to his knees. He did not shout. He did not call for doctors. He held the boy's head in his lap and whispered over and over the name he had once given him in joy. Ivanushka, my little Ivan. He kissed the wound as if kisses could stitch back cracked skulls. His tears pooled with the blood. Guards stood, frozen, their mouths open, afraid to speak. Afraid that the man kneeling before them would turn and forget that he was a father, not a monster. But it was already too late. For days, Ivan would not eat, would not speak. He wandered the palace like a ghost trapped in his own crime. Mirrors were covered. Bells did not toll. And in the corners of empty halls, he thought he heard the boy's laughter, not haunting, but worse. Forgiving. This was not a death. It was a prophecy torn from the pages of history. The empire would crumble. The time of troubles would follow. Plagues, famine, invasion, all cascading from one blow, struck in madness, mourned in silence. And yet, the world did not stop. Snow still fell. The Volga still moved. But for Ivan, the days never returned to light. The portrait survives. In a quiet room in Moscow, it shows the exact moment that Tsar became less than a man, less than a ruler, a father holding his future, and killing it. The desert didn't care who you were. It stretched like a vast, silent punishment, windblown, endless, indifferent. Beneath the sun, the sand shimmered like coin, but it burned flesh like betrayal. It was here, far from the marble villas of Rome, that Marcus Licinius Crassus met his end. Not on the battlefield, but in humiliation. Not by sword, but by the very thing he had worshipped above gods. Country or blood, gold once. Crassus had owned more wealth than any Roman alive. His hands could summon legions, crumble estates, and silence rivals with a single purse. He purchased power the way others purchased statues. He bought burnt houses during firestorms, acquired slaves like scrolls, and funded Julius Caesar's rise not out of loyalty, but control. To Crassus, the Republic was a market, and he believed he could buy eternity But gold cannot buy fate at Carrhae in the choking heat of Mesopotamia. His legions met the Parthians and were unmade. Thousands died under a storm of arrows that fell like locusts, blinding and endless. His son, his pride, was cut down before his eyes, his head paraded on a spear, and Crassus, once master of Roman wealth, became a captive. Not just of the enemy, but of irony. They didn't kill him with haste. No, the Parthian satraps, amused by his arrogance, devised a final spectacle, a punishment shaped like a metaphor. They held him down, stripped him of armor, forced his mouth open got, and they brought the gold, molten, glowing, hissing like a serpent made of light. They poured it slowly, not out of cruelty, but performance. Crassus, who had once counted coins with greedy fingers, now choked on the molten breath of his own desire. The smell was not of fire, but of scorched flesh and seared ambition. His body spasmed, his mouth blackened, his eyes burst. But the message was clear. You loved gold? Then feed on it. He died not as a general, nor a senator, but as a warning. Later, they filled a puppet effigy of his body and used it to mock Rome. A man of empty wealth, hollowed by greed, paraded as an object lesson. The empire he had once helped shape did not mourn him. The silence from Rome was not grief, it was calculation. Crassus believed wealth would immortalize him, that riches were a shield against irrelevance. But gold has no memory. It does not mourn its masters. It only reflects their hunger. His corpse vanished into the sand. No monument, no grave. Only a legend of a man who tried to drink eternity and drowned instead. He came to Rome not as an emperor, but as an interruption, a storm wearing silk. Elagabalus was 14 when they placed the laurel on his head. Too young, too foreign, too strange. He did not march like a general or pray like a priest. He painted his eyelids, wore dresses stitched with stars, and asked to be called lady behind closed doors. To the Senate, he was chaos. To himself, perhaps, only honest. The marble walls of the Palatine echoed with murmurs. He is unnatural. He is cursed. He is not one of us. Power, they said, had fallen into the hands of a boy who did not understand boundaries. What frightened them most was that he refused to pretend that he married men. He danced barefoot through temples of old gods, declaring the sun the only true deity. His lovers were slaves, actors, guards. He replaced generals with musicians, dismissed tradition like dust, and turned the empire's face toward something older, wilder, something they had buried. The court turned cold. Assassins were planted. Behind smiles, daggered glances followed his every step. But he danced on, lavishly, desperately, as if he danced fast enough, death would forget his name. In the end, it wasn't daggers. It was pillows. They came for him in the dark, his own guards, faces still warm from wine and oath-breaking. He fled to his mother's chamber. She, once his protector, once the fire that lit his ascent, was powerless now. They dragged her away. She screamed his name, but the sound was swallowed by the stone. He ran. Through corridors where he used to play. Down halls lined with mirrors. He had once kissed. They caught him in a storage room, amid silk and incense, the scent of lavender and oil. He begged, not for life, but for understanding. He asked who he was. They answered with silence, then hands, then cushions, then weight. They did not stab him. They did not strike him. They smothered him, quietly, slowly, as if ashamed of what he was, and more ashamed of what they were doing. His body fought like a flame under glass, then slackened. They dumped his corpse in the Tiber like spoiled meat. No tomb, no epitaph, only water, cold, dark. Indifferent Rome scrubbed him from its memory. But water remembers what stone forgets. Elagabalus lives on in rumors, in paintings defaced by time, in echoes that ripple through history's most uncomfortable silences. Was he monster or mirror? Tyrant or tragedy? Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. His death was not just a killing. It was an erasure of difference, of defiance, of the fragile human inside the costume history refused to understand. Before he wore the turban, before the throne bent beneath his weight, they locked him in a room with no windows. It was called the kafes, the cage, a chamber in the Ottoman palace where princes were hidden like secrets. For years, Sultan Ibrahim lived there, a boy in embroidered silence. No light, no friends, no sun but memory. His only companions, whispers through the walls, footsteps in the night, and the knowledge that each morning could bring poison with breakfast. He was born royal, but he grew up like a prisoner of his own bloodline. When his older brothers were executed one by one, Ibrahim was spared, not out of mercy, but neglect. And when his final brother died and the throne passed to him, he did not ascend with dignity. He emerged blinking, twitching, uncertain whether the world outside was real or another hallucination. The court called him Ibrahim the Mad. But what else could he have become? He feared death in every shadow, believed spies crawled in the walls. He screamed at mirrors, thinking his own reflection plotted against him. His touch with reality slipped like silk through trembling fingers. Yet around him, the palace glittered. He surrounded himself with opulence, not from desire, but desperation. Jewels soothed him. Perfume drowned the scent of anxiety. He filled his harem with hundreds of women, not for lust, but for proof that he existed, that he ruled, that he was not still locked in the cage, but madness sharpened. It did not soften. One day, he ordered all the royal concubines in the harem, hundreds of women, drowned in sacks and tossed into the Bosphorus. Their crime, suspicion, or perhaps nothing at all. The water swallowed their screams, but the city felt the weight of their silence. The empire trembled. His mother, Cogsam Sultan, once the hand that held him through childhood, now became the hand that signed his death. It was quiet. No spectacle. No trial. Just silk cords and silence. They came to his chambers at night. The air smelled of rosewater and decay. Ibrahim was curled on his divan, mumbling to shadows. When the guards entered, he didn't fight. Perhaps he thought it was another dream. Perhaps he welcomed the return of the cage one final time. The cords wrapped around his neck like memory. He gasped, not from pain, but from recognition. Then, stillness. In that moment, the palace did not erupt. It sighed, as if releasing the breath it had held for too long. His body was buried without honor. The empire moved on. The cage was cleaned. Another child prince would soon inherit it. But the madness didn't die with him. It lingered in the marble, in the echoes of footsteps pacing alone, in the quiet terror passed from throne to throne like a crown made of shadow. He was not a monster. He was what happens when a child is taught to fear the sun. They called him the B-name, the beloved, when he first wore the crown. Charles was young then, delicate in manner, gentle in speech. His coronation robes hung from his shoulders like wind-draped silk. France exhaled. After years of conflict, here was a monarch soft with kindness, not scorched by ambition. But kindness in this world is not a fortress. And the mind, even royal, is only ever held together by threads. By 30, those threads began to snap. It began with absences. Charles would go silent in mid-sentence, eyes fixed on nothing, as if watching ghosts pass through the palace walls. He wandered the gardens barefoot in winter. Sometimes he forgot names, not of courtiers, but of his own children. Then came the glass. One morning, he refused to move. He claimed he was made of glass, and his bones would shatter if touched. He wore reinforced clothing padded with thick layers, and begged his servants to walk slowly near him, so their steps wouldn't send tremors through the stone and crack him. He sat in the hall like a statue afraid of itself, fragile, exposed, already broken. The court did not laugh. They could not, for this was their king. Instead, they wove his madness into ceremony. Ministers staged meetings in hushed tones, speaking through veils. Pages were trained to tiptoe. His chamber was softened with cushions, the windows draped to dim the light. Even his enemies hesitated, unsure if they were facing a monarch or a mirror cracked too many times. Behind the curtains of this royal theater, power seeped elsewhere. His wife, Queen Isabeau, ruled in silence. Nobles carved the kingdom into factions. His brother schemed. His cousin plotted. France was a chessboard played by ghosts, while the king sat trembling in the center, convinced he was a vessel of glass in a world of hammers. But madness does not pause for politics. One night, during a fit, he ran naked through the corridors, screaming that demons were melting his limbs. Another time, he refused to bathe, certain the water held knives. Rats crept under his bed, feasting on scraps left by attendants too afraid to enter. His throne, once anointed by God, became a chair no one wanted to face. Outside the palace walls, war brewed. England waited. Armies marched. But inside, France was ruled by silence, the kind that accumulates not from peace, but from terror. Charles VI did not die in one moment. He dissolved, piece by piece, until the man who once held the future of a kingdom became a symbol of what happens when the mind collapses inward and the world politely averts its eyes. And still, they bowed before a man they could not save. A king of glass in a hall of mirrors. He lived behind iron, not behind a wall, not behind bars, but behind a mask, seamless, cold, expressionless. A cage forged not for safety, but for silence. It covered his face entirely, bolted at the jaw, sealed at the temples. He could eat, only through slits. He could speak, but what voice could ever echo through steel? They called him many things. A prisoner, a traitor, a rumor, but no one knew his name. Or if they did, they never spoke it again. Some said he was just a disgraced valet, others, a noble fallen from grace. But the oldest whisper, the one passed like a forbidden prayer, said he was a twin, a brother, a shadow of the Sun King, Louis XIV, locked away because two kings cannot wear one crown. He was moved constantly, from Bastille to Sainte Marguerite, to the fortress at Pignerol, each cell darker than the last. No windows, no mirrors, only guards trained not to speak, not to look, not to remember. They say the man never resisted. He did not cry out. He did not rage. Because what they took from him was not comfort. It was identity. To live without a name is to drift, to float, in time without tether or shape. And over the years, his silence became a deeper punishment than the mask itself. A slow suffocation of the soul, not the lungs. A living unmaking. What did he think in those unlit hours? Did he remember the feel of sunlight on skin? Did he hum lullabies he no longer knew the words to? Or did he simply forget he was ever born at all? And yet, he was never killed. They could have ended him with a blade, a fall, a cup of something silent. But no, they kept him breathing. That was the true cruelty. He was not erased violently, but slowly, by keeping him alive while stripping away everything that made him human. Perhaps that was the point. Dead man might become a martyr. A vanished one becomes myth. And so he remained until the day he died. No funeral, no monument. Just a report scribbled in a ledger, buried under bureaucracy and dust. His body was placed in a shallow grave, the iron mask still bolted in place. But the story did not die with him, because stories, especially ones this forbiddens, cling to the cracks in history like mold. Was he royal? Was he wronged? Or was he merely a symbol of what power fears most? Truth, born too close to the throne. He was not just hidden. He was unmade, and his mask? It did not conceal a face. It concealed the question. There is a silence that follows the fall of a crown, not the silence of peace, but the kind that comes after screaming, after execution, after centuries of velvet lies. It settles into stone corridors and echoing chambers, where no footsteps walk anymore, only memory. We've seen them rise, kings in ivory cradles, queens draped in gold and fear. We've seen their madness bloom behind closed doors, their cruelty masked as ceremony. We've watched them shatter beneath the weight of symbols they were never strong enough to carry. Marie's blood soaked the scaffold. Crassus choked on molten gold, even cradled his dying son. Elagabalus wore lipstick and terror. Charles thought himself glass. The Iron Mask died without a face. All different deaths. One truth: power does not save. It isolates. It distorts. It consumes. These weren't just monarchs. They were children once, soft-eyed, wide-hearted, held by mothers who whispered that they would one day rule the world. But rule is not grace. It is theater balanced on fear. And fear is a stage with no escape hatch. Their crowns were not halos. They were mirrors, reflecting only what each monarch feared most about themselves. In the end, no matter how divine the throne claimed to be, it was always made of mortal weight. Bone, grief, dust. No scepter outlasts time. No title outruns death. All that remains now is silence, and the question that lingers in it: what do we worship, power, or the spectacle of its destruction?